I got the habit of drinking coffee when I was little, and it was mostly milk, but I liked it, and they called me Peg from that. They shampooed my hair. I had long curls up till I was about 5 years old, and they shampooed my hair with Cuticle soap. And I cried when they combed my curls. So Mama had Miss Fanny Spencer to cut my hair when I was around 5. I still have some of those curls that was saved from that time in the attic. Back in those days, you had a day for everything. Of course, Sunday was to go to church and have company. There no work on Sunday. My daddy wouldn't even hear tobacco on Sunday. He said if they primed it on Friday and Saturday morning and Monday, you didn't have to cure on Sunday. It would be either yellowing at that time or it would be killed out, they said, when it was dry, if you primed on Monday. And Monday was wash day, if weather permitting. Tuesday was ironing day. Wednesday and Thursday you did other work that you had special work to do, as if in canning time. And Friday you cleaned house and take the ashes from the fireplace and the home comfort range. And Saturday was baking day, shoe polishing day, and all of that. Mama bought a player piano from the Bowen Piano Company, I think it was. And we had all these rolls of music. I remember I had Going Down the Valley, Unclouded Day, and a Red Wing, and a lot of other good ones. But nobody was learning to play the piano because we played the music rolls all the time. I had my tonsils out after I was in first grade at Friendship School. The nurse came and examined everybody, the public school nurse. And she looked in my throat and said my tonsils were enlarged and need to come out. That was enough said, Daddy. Mama had them taken out the next summer. Dr. Beverly Jones Sr. had a clinic at Boonville School, and that's where Pansy and I went to have our tonsils taken out. We stayed there one night, and then Mama sat up with us all night, too. The next day, we went to Uncle Bob Fletcher's to stay the next night, so we'd be near the doctor in case we didn't get along well. And she stayed with us there, and then we went home. Chip also went and had hers removed there at the clinic, but it wasn't the same time we did. I wanted to have mine removed so I could get ice cream to eat, because they promised all the ice cream to us that we could eat. In saying some of the words that I heard in Yadkin County as a child, I remember these, and I will add them. No siree bobtail, pea turkey, slop the hogs, and plum pretty. Also, when the cow was milked, the last milk was called stripping the cow, and that was the richest milk. The quilts, of course, that Mama made were on the bed, and on top of that was a county pane, and that was a beautiful spread. Maybe I've already mentioned about Joe and Pansy selling clover ring salve and rosebud salve, and I went along with them, but I wasn't the one selling the salve, and when you sold it all, you got a prize from the company that had mailed you the salve. I've told about the sawmill, and we'd take my daddy's lunch to the sawmill and get to stay a while and play in the sawdust pile, and that was a lot of fun. And Dorothea Matthews would be down there with her husband's lunch, Elsie Matthews, and he was the man who ran the boiler. My daddy did the sawing of the lumber. And one time I was riding back with her on the back of the buggy, and we were going over there straight across from the home place. She came up the hill, and I fell back, and my head hit the ground. I guess that's what's the matter with my brain now. Ha Mentioning the buggy, Joe and I used to ride on a seat in the foot of the buggy facing my mother and daddy. And this was a plank that my daddy had put a small piece on each end so that it wouldn't slip. and that was a good place for us to ride. The way we had our house cooled in the summertime was a very good way. We'd raise the windows and close the green blinds at the windows, which were louvered, and turn the louvers so the air could get in, and that was a very, very cool way to have the house in the summertime. One time the blinds were closed upstairs and the window was up, and Jip sat down the window and leaned back against it and fell out the window. That was before my day, but I've heard it told many times. It didn't hurt her one bit. I've heard a lot of talk of the Depression, but really in Yadkin County we didn't know much about it. We grew all of our food. Mama made our pretty clothes, so we had plenty to eat and wear, and what more did we need? I've mentioned that Mama picked the guitar and my dad played the fiddle, and one song that I've heard him say that he would have played, Old Dan Tucker, but Grandma Hall wouldn't let him play that because there was a elderly man in the community named Dan Tucker, and she thought it would be making light of him, and she didn't believe in that. They had the revival the second Sunday in July, always at our church, and it lasted a week, and we had daytime services and nighttime services. And the reason it was had at that time was because the crops had been laid by. That means they had been cultivated and plowed and hoed all they needed to be, and it was too early to start planting tobacco, so they had more leisure time then than any time. There was one game I haven't told about that I played, and I remember getting a ball at Winston one time when we went with Mama down there shopping and Papa. A rubber ball at the diamond store, and I couldn't wait to get home. I held that ball and pinched it all the way home. I can't wait to get home to use it to throw through my. I had a hook off of a keg or something there at the well house, right out from the steps on the gable next to the house, and that was my basketball goal, and that was what I was going to throw in. It was that small rubber ball because I didn't have a big basketball. As a child, I heard my dad speak of the Richmond Hill Law School, Judge Pearson, many, many times. And twice he wanted to go up there so much, Pansy Dillard took him one time, and even Sue Dill took him one time. And at that time, you just about had to go in by grapevine because there wasn't any road into it like they have done today, and have the house restored. And even Sue Dill and I went up there when the Governor Martin came and dedicated it. Another way I helped on the farm was to turn in the grindstone when my dad wanted to sharpen something on it, and it was out there near the smokehouse. And it was a big round stone, and it was in this wooden contraption that held it up, and you turned it and you put water on it to sharpen the big blade that was on the wheat cradle where you cut wheat and other things that needed sharpening. We had a corn sheller too in the corn crib, and you had to shell your corn to take it to the mill to make the corn meal. And if you got in a hurry, shelling by hand was slow, so my dad had a corn sheller, and you put an ear of corn down in it and turned it, and it shelled the corn off. One way I like to play in playhouses, and we like to decorate them with moss, and we'd gather a lot of moss and put it in the playhouses to use as the furniture. And we had a playhouse beside the smokehouse out there on the east side, and we used some moss in that and other things to make it pretty. I remember playing in that with Marjorie Davis, which was Bert Davis's sister, older than he, I think, came up and stayed at Uncle Stephen and Rachel Davis, her grandparents, and came over to the house and played. I remember Bert Davis coming one time and not playing in the playhouse, but he came up the road, and we saw him over there when he was visiting at his grandparents. This is about something that was before my time, subscription schools. I remember hearing them tell that they had one over there at Uncle Ike Hall's Peel House, we called it, And Pamelia Hall Davenport was a teacher. She was Pamelia Hall at that time, Uncle Sanford Hall's daughter. And the way you did this, you paid the teacher or your child to go, because it was not a public school. And I remember seeing Bessie went to that, and I think Travis did, and Evan was old enough not. And at the reunion, I've heard that Uncle Sanford Hall had a subscription school long before that, and he was paid in produce and anything that they could pay with. He was a subscription school teacher too, back long before his daughter was. I want to tell about the old-fashioned brooms. They were made of broom straw. Mama went out in an old field where there was broom straw growing and cut this, and it was real long, and brought it in down there beside the wash house. She would make them into brooms with tight cord around them. She would scald them to get the down out of the broom, and that was what we swept most of the house with. In the living room, where we had a rug, we had a stick to sweep that, but the rest of the house was swept with these broom sage brooms. I have one on the back porch now that I got at the trading post in the mountains. I wanted to tell about my dad, Charles Aquila Hall, belonging to the Copeland Lodge at his death, number 390. But before that, he had joined the first lodge that was in that part of the country, which was the Rockford Lodge, number 251. There had been a lodge at Huntsville, I think, and this one at Rockford was the first one in this section. And he joined September 1911 and was initiated. He passed October 1911, and he was raised November 1911, and admitted and demitted July the 20th, 1918, when this lodge was no more. Then he joined the Copeland Lodge October 13th, 1938, and that's where he belonged when he died August 17th, 1944, and they held his funeral. When I was growing up, we didn't have pictures made on our birthdays, but we celebrated our birthdays, and I remember Mama making me a French cream cake, which was my favorite cake of all cakes. We had lots of pictures made, and Joe, Jip, and Pansy had one made at the photographer, and I wasn't old enough, so Mama took me to Mr. Bob Krieger at Smithtown and had mine made specially. And before that, she'd taken us out to Uncle Bob Fletcher and Aunt Mamie Fletcher's store at Smithtown, and Mamie Stimson had made our pictures out behind the store with a lap robe hanging up on the fence. I think the fenced-in place is where they kept chickens that they brought to the store and sold. But we had our pictures made standing outside that fence. As I've told you before, Grandpa Hall was in the war between the states. And the Civil War is his real name. He was drafted, and two of his brothers also were drafted. I have his loyalty oath right here in my den. The oath reads, T.G. Hall, Yadkin County, State of North Carolina, do solemnly swear or affirm in presence of Almighty God that I will henceforth faithfully support, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Union of the States thereunder, and that I will in like manner abide by and faithfully support all laws and proclamations which have been made during the existing rebellion with reference to the emancipation of slaves, so help me God. And he signed this. And the Justice of Peace was Dr. E.O. Benbow, who was a first cousin of my dad's. The date on it is 1865. There are two witnesses, look like Mr. Ed Hoosier and E. Benbow. Since they had fought against the government, they had to swear these loyalty oaths when the war was over. The way we entertained ourselves. And then in the third grade, Miss Brandon was my teacher, and she boarded at Aunt Ada's. She and Miss Jessie Hahn. Miss Jessie was teaching fourth grade. And So I remember being the letter carrier for Miss Brennan from Travis, and she was a special teacher to me. I liked her very much, and recently she sent me a card and said she remembered a little blonde-headed girl, and she was boarding at Daneaters, running in and out, and the reason I was running in and out, I was carrying the mail, I guess. But that summer then, our birthdays came, mine the 9th of September and hers the 10th of September, and so she had me over to her house to stay from Tuesday night till Sunday, and that was my first vacation away from home, and I got homesick the first night after Travis left. But she talked to me and told me that Hilda, her sister, and I were the same age, and we'd play together the next day and all that, so I had a good time and never forgot that. We went over to the mill at Burn Park or whatever it was, where there was a creek with rocks and all, and I just thought that was great. Felt like I'd been somewhere for sure when I went back home. In the 4th grade, Miss Jessie Horn was my teacher, and I remember learning the multiplication tables in her class and a lot of things, and she knew somebody, and she got a piano borrowed for commencement, and we really had a big commencement. I remember one thing we had, maybe in the 3rd grade or 4th grade one, we had a whole bunch of us marching around singing with a little seaside tin buckets like they have at the seaside to play in the sand with, and a spade, and we sang about going to the seaside with our shades and spades, going to the seaside. We sunbonnet made, and Mama made me this pretty sunbonnet to wear in that little drill. And we had others besides that one too that I can't recall right now, but we had a real good commencement. In the 5th grade, Mr. Wilson Taylor was my teacher, and in the 6th grade, Mr. W.M. Collins was my teacher, and he was a real good teacher too. 7th grade, then Mr. Wilson Taylor had moved up to be principal, and Mr. Collins had gone on to some other school to be principal. And I remember speaking the recitation at commencement in the 7th grade. Well, every commencement I had a recitation to say, but I remember the one in the 7th grade was the bad little girl. And Myrtle Tomlinson from East Bend, cousin Sarah Thomas, my daddy's first cousin's daughter, trained me in saying that one. I had to get extra help on it. And Mama had me a pretty dress to wear. It was a pink crepe dress, and she sent it off and had the skirt pleated someplace. And I was really dressed up. And I said the bad little girl and won the contest. Then that fall of 1928, September 1928, I started at East Bend High School. Of course, we rode in a Model T Jeep driving. And Mr. H. Braswell was the principal. Mr. Singletary was the civics teacher. Mr. Moody, George Moody, was the English teacher. Ms. H. Braswell was math teacher. And science was Mr. E.L. Ponder. And they were good teachers, and I had a good year as a freshman. That year I met Chauncey Brown in September of 1928, and we've known each other ever since. Chauncey Shore, she was then. The recitation contest was at the end of that year, too, and Chauncey, Lucy Hoosier, and I, who were all good friends, were the ones that spoke in the recitation contest. And I spoke, "Towels shall be tied tonight," was the one I said that time, and Mama made me a beautiful white flat crepe dress to wear. She had it picoed down here at Miss Viola White's on 4th Street, and it's still in my attic, but it's not white anymore. But it had a Bertha collar, we called it, and then it had ruffles, which were about 6 or 8 inches wide, and they were picoed up the skirt, and that was a beautiful dress. Jip graduated that year in 1929, the first year that I went to high school. And then in the 9th grade, Joe did the driving of the Model T. And this year, Mr. E.L. Ponder had become principal, and Mr. Braswell had gone on someplace else. Don't know how Mr. Ponder worked that, but he got to be principal. And English was Mr. George Moody again. History, Mr. John Nicholson. Algebra, Miss Bill Howell. Biology, Miss Thelma King from Greensboro. And Latin, Mr. Ponder, who was the principal. And at commencement that year, I wore a pink georgette dress and a green georgette dress that I had selected down here at Winston. And that was the first time I had store-bought dresses for commencement. And I realize now they were not as pretty as the dresses Mama had made for me before that. I was in the Glee Club, and I felt very good about that. And also during that year, our Literary Society, or whatever it was, had given a play, and I was the nurse in that, and I borrowed a nurse's uniform and cap and wore in it for that big play that we gave on Saturday night. Then in the 10th grade, Mr. Ponder was still principal. I had English and French under Mr. Luther Francis. He was a very good teacher. He had graduated at Gifford College and had a year at Harvard, so I felt like he was very well educated. History was still Mr. Nicholson. Math was Miss Harrell. Latin was Mr. Ponder. And Miss Thelma King Science. His S.J. Honeycutt taught music and had that in chapel. That year my big item was being chief marshal at commencement. By being the one with the best grades in class qualified me to be the chief marshal. And I ushered every night that we had commencement. And I would have rather done that than been president. I just thought it was big. And I know I had on high-heel shoes for my first high-heel shoes. And here I was ushering in these new shoes. And I had to take a note to the principal up on the room beside the stage. And I fell up the steps because I weren't used to my shoes. We had a junior-senior party at school that we juniors gave for the seniors. And that's the way you did. You entertained the class that was graduating by the class just below them. Now in the 11th grade, which we only had 11 grades at that time, 11th grade I was a senior starting in the fall of 1931. Mr. Ponder was still the principal. English and French was Mr. Lydecker. History was Mr. Nicholson. And math was Miss Harrell. Physics, Mr. Ivy Singletary, who had been my teacher in civics in the 8th grade. He'd come back now and was my physics teacher. I was exempt from every examination that spring because that was the rule then if your grades were good enough. And I had 18 units when I graduated. I only had to have 16, but I had taken Latins 2 years, so that gave me 2 extra units. I was valedictorian of the class and also had the main part in the senior play. The name of the senior play was The Man in the Moon. When I graduated and gave the valedictorian speech, I wore a white chiffon dress that Mama bought for me down here in Winston, and it was beautiful. It was long like an evening dress, but she thought the other girls would not be wearing long dresses, so she cut it off and made it to a street dress for me. I still have it up in the attic now, but it's no longer white. We had a senior party that year given by the 10th graders at school. I spent the night with Jamie Smitherman, and Joe made me a blue and white dress to wear to this. And Joe had already graduated school and was there at home before she married Nick, and she made this blue and white dress, and I've still got it in the attic. During school, when I was in the sophomore class, fall of 1929, or maybe it was December, I didn't need a permit, but because Joe and Pansy were having permits down here at Winston there, and on a store on Liberty Street, I don't know where it was, Eford's or what store it was, had a beauty parlor, and they were having a permit. So I thought because they were having one, I had to have one too. It was an ordeal. You were dangling to this strange-looking machine with these things fastened to your hair. It took a long time, and it really didn't do well for my hair because my hair is natural curly enough that it didn't need a permit, and it made it look awful. But I had to have one because they did. I'll tell about the beds that we used to have. Now, the company bedroom upstairs, the south bedroom upstairs, had a feather bed on it. But I remember when we had straw in the chicks on the bed, and so often the straw had to be taken out and changed because it would get too crushed. Later, though, Mama got mattresses before I finished high school up at Mr. T.L. Hayes' store at Boonville, and that was much better. But to make up a bed, you had to have it real smooth, and Mama had a stick that she'd smooth the counterpins with to make them look nice. and that was about a yard long, and it came in real good to do that. But I never was allowed to make up the beds. I couldn't do them well enough. And I remember the skillets we had. You might call a frying pan a skillet, and some of them called marcelling your hair or waving it. Had Armistice Day on November the 11th, which now is Veterans Day. Had turnips in a turnip patch, and you always planted them the last day of July. There was a little verse that said, "Plant turnips last day of July, or you'll have turnips wet or dry." We took our lunches to school, and we called it dinner in a tin bucket at East Bend. No lunchroom at all. And we took fried half-moon pies and things like that. And we had a whole hour at lunchtime. I remember wash day out there in the country. You had to wash furnished with 2 big black iron pots. You built a fire under them after they were filled up with water. And then you had your wash tubs, your galvanized wash tubs. You used lye soap in them and washboards. And then you put them, after you'd washed them with lye soap in this water in the tubs, you put them in a pot to boil. Then you rinsed them and put them in another pot to scald, and then you put them in blue and rinse water, and the blue in this last rinse water was supposed to help make them whiter. And you hung them on the line in the sun. The white clothes, the colored clothes, were hung in the shade on the line if possible. And families were judged by the way their wash looked out on the line. After Jip and I got Mama a Maytag washer, she still scalded her clothes and put them in the wash pots because she said they were not sterile unless you did. On Easter Mondays, it was custom to go to the Pilot Mountain. I never did go, but the older ones did, and I remember Joe went and fell partway down the little pinnacle while she was over there. Lawn parties, we had ice cream to sell, made in the freezer, and different groups would have this to make money for the church or some way. And the first time I saw an ice cream cone was at one of these lawn parties. First pair of hose I had was, I think, summer before I went to the 8th grade. And I was wearing socks, and Grandma Fletcher told Mama that my knees were getting too big to wear socks. I should put on hose. And the first pair I had was flesh-colored, kind of a peach color. They were something for sure. I remember playing with paper dolls upstairs in the company bedroom, and I cut my paper dolls out of a Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward catalog and put the prettiest ones for the doll, and then I cut the dresses out and cut little pieces at the top to turn down to make them stay on the paper dolls. We ate all oilcloth during the week, but when company came in on Sundays, we'd put on the white linen cloths and had white linen napkins. You didn't have paper napkins back then. I want to tell about my Easter memories now. I remember very well the egg hunts that we had at church on Sunday afternoon at Friendship Church. I remember Bernice Matthews, Wilhelm having one, and I was in it. And later on, I was in her wedding because I grew up and the others had gone from home who would have been in her wedding, so she called on me to be a bridesmaid. I remember one Easter having a picnic down in the cow pasture near the stream, and Mama made little chocolate tarts, and they were so good for us to have in the picnic down there in the cow pasture. I also remember a golden wedding of Grandma Fletcher's sister and her husband. It was Aunt Sally and Uncle Hamp Binkley down in the Baltimore section of Yadkin County. And it was like they had surprise birthday dinners down there with a big, long table out in the yard, and everybody brought food to go on it. And they made a picture. I remember we were all in the picture, and that was a real big day. But you scarcely ever heard of anybody having a golden wedding back then because people didn't live that long. I remember going to New Home to say a recitation, and I guess it was kind of like a Sunday school convention, and I had on the prettiest pink dress at Easter that Mama made me, and it was either shirred or gathered, I can remember exactly how that little pink dress looked, and I was in the program, and felt very good about that, of course. I also remember that the people went to Pilot Mountain on Easter, either Easter Sunday or Easter Monday. I remember so many people doing that, but I was too little to do that, so I never did get to go to Pilot Mountain for Easter. I did go to Pilot Mountain other times, and I remember when we had company from Iowa, the Reese's, we went over there to the Pilot Mountain, and that was my first trip. And I climbed the pinnacle steps to the pinnacle later, but not that time. I wanted to tell her now about going to the Negro meetings at Benbow's Chapel, which maybe I've already mentioned, and they were real nice to us, but we liked to hear them sing. I think was our main reason for going. They also had the shoutings and all that they carried on too, and then they had the revivals at Friendship that I attended, and I can remember a long time ago someone shouting, more than one shouting at Friendship revival services. I also remember after I was grown teaching school, I did something at the revival service that I guess I shouldn't have done. Lexi Angel and Bill Shasta, she later married, and Zeno Wooten was the boy I was dating, and I there on Sunday evening, all sitting together. And Reverend E.W. Turner, Esther Turner, was the helper in the meeting, and he was preaching, and he had false teeth, and they fell down. Well, Lexi and I both were bad for life, and we laughed till we shook the bench we were sitting on, the pew we were sitting on, and I've never been very proud of that. Going back long ago, I remember the singing school had one summer there at Friendship, and this Mr. Maston from Jonesville taught it, and his son Reese Maston helped, and we were taught in the shape notes, and then we were taught the little rhyme, let us endeavor to show whenever we join a song time together, and row, row, row your boats. All those were songs to keep us to keep in time together. I have a copy of the shape notes we used back then for the scale, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, and I want to keep those too. I want to tell about the little chickens. Mama used to set hens, and they would hatch in a certain number of days. I've forgotten how many. And she would take them off, and she'd grease the darling little yellow chickens' heads. I don't know why now that she greased their heads, but she did. And there's also something on their little bill that she had to take off. But they were so pretty to have, those little chickens. I want to tell now about farming. And I've mentioned the pretty horses that we had, and G was right to a horse, and Ha was left. The main crop for money was tobacco, and I remember how this was started with a tobacco bed that was cleaned off and burned off in January, and that was to kill the filth out there, and then the unwanted plants that would grow there. But you stirred up the tobacco seeds and planted them, and you either saved your seeds from pretty plants, stalks that you had, or you bought your seeds. And you sometimes had room for other plants around the edge to get a start from cabbage plants or some other plants that you needed around the edge of your tobacco bed. And the field that this tobacco was going to be sit in had to be plowed and disked and harrowed, and the rows had to be run off and fertilized, put in them with a fertilizer distributor, and then they had to be mounded up with a bull tongue plow that did that, I think. And it was just like a triangle of dirt standing up there. And this is where you set your tobacco. You usually took the plants out of the tobacco bed and put them in tubs and took them to the field where you were going to set them. And in dry weather, you had to use a hand setter, but if it was seasoned and it was wet, you just used a peg. And there was a long rake-like thing, 16 inches wide, with a peg in each end, and I was the one that used that to mark where the plants would be set, so the person didn't have to take time to distance each time, and it made it go faster. If it was dry, you used a tobacco setter. It would hold a gallon of water or so on one side, and on the other side was like a funnel, and you dropped your plant in this, and you dropped the root down first, and it joined the water at the bottom, and there was a button that you mashed to give it the water, and it released the plant in the water at the same time. And you put your foot against it then to mash the soil up against it. And every 16 inches or so you did this. One person dropped the plants, one had to carry water for the planter. And as I said, I marked the places from the set with a big rake back thing with a peg in each end. Now, after this was set, you had to reset it if the plants died. And then, that was in May, you were setting it back. In June, you had to plow, cultivate it, and hoe it, and all that. And then, by July, in time for big meeting, the tobacco was usually laid by. And we didn't have to do any work right during that time. And then later on, you had to top it, or it would bloom out at the top. Now, later on, now they let it bloom out, but back then you didn't. You had to top it and then sucker it, because suckers would come where the leaves were, and that was really a hard job. Then in August, you started priming it. Only one time do I remember ever cutting in tobacco, and that was when you cut down a whole stalk and slit it up, and then put that on a stick right in the field and put it in the tobacco borne on the tears and cured it. It took longer to cure that kind of tobacco because it took longer to dry that whole stalk out. And after it was cured, you had to take it out and put it in the pack house and keep it dry until time to sort it out and get it ready to take to market. And then sorting it out, and stripping tobacco they called it, you divide it out in like packs, the prettiest in one pack, the next prettiest, and then the old lugs we call them in another pack, and the green tobacco in another pack. And then this had to be tied. You took a real pretty good pliable leaf and tied it around and around and slipped it through it. Now, I never did do much tying. I don't think I was good enough doing that, but I did take it off the stick and take it to the one who was grading the tobacco. Now, another thing I want to tell about is the kerosene lamps that had to be washed and filled up on Saturday, and I didn't do that. Bessie usually did that. We had glass lamps for every room except the parlor, and there was a real metal lamp with a pretty shade on it, but it still burned oil too. Now, for taking the baths, we had a 10 galvanized tub, which was used for washing during the week, and there was a reservoir on the Home Comfort range that held a lot of water, and used that. But in the summertime, you put your water out in the tin tubs in the sun, and it got warm, and you used that for your baths. I remember in the wintertime we wore union suits, and the bad part about that was putting that down in your stocking and keeping it smooth down in there. Up in the country, we had bluebirds, and I remember they built nest out in the post in the garden. That was a favorite place for them to build nest. Also, the bob whites were off down toward the old spring place, and they would call bob whites so pretty, and you could fool them by saying bob white to them sometime. The whippoorwills I love to hear in the evenings after supper. Now, I've never heard a whippoorwill down here in town, but I sure did love to hear them in the country. In telling about the shaped notes, I should have mentioned that's the way Joe first learned to play the organ or the piano there at home, was by shaped notes. She later took piano lessons at East Bend High School and played the regular way, but she first learned to play by shaped notes.